ahead, I think, and get us started, right? Well, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to be getting this webinar, this ICOM webinar started today. My name is Glenn Perkins. I work as the Curator of Community History at the Greensboro History Museum in North Carolina, here in the southeastern part of the United States. And it's really, really terrifically thrilling to me to be able to have the opportunity today to connect with a truly global audience and to moderate a discussion on areas that are deeply important to me: cities, museums, and sustainability. The International Council of Museums, ICOM, is dedicated to sustainability through working towards sustainable development goals that are set in the United Nations Agenda 2030. And most of you are no doubt familiar with these goals. A 2019 ICOM resolution endorsed the efforts of its working group on sustainability, which you'll probably hear the initials WGS today a lot, to connect museum practices to the agenda's sustainable development goals, or SDGs. The resolution commits to empowering members, visitors, and communities to make positive changes in pursuit of these goals. And today we're going to talk about what that empowerment means in relation to cities and communities. I think it's such a great verb, empower, or a great noun, empowerment. SDG 11, which is the Sustainable Development Goal focused on cities, envisions making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable by focusing on areas like housing, heritage, transport, and equity. That's just to name a few. But how do we realize these goals in places as different as Rio de Janeiro and New York City, or even medium-sized cities like my city of Greensboro, or even small cities like the Nunavut territorial capital of Inuit? And what are the opportunities, especially for museums, that focus on cities and communities? Well, ICOM actually has a committee dedicated to museums of the city, CAMOC, and some of its members have come together with the working group on sustainability to assemble today's panel of illustrious speakers. We have Luis Souza, Andrea de la Place, Katherine Cole, and Anais Reyes. And this is the second in a series of 6 webinars that are looking at museums and the sustainable development goals. For our program today, I'll introduce each panelist to provide an initial presentation, and then we're going to move on to some discussion. And of course, we want you and the audience, we want to hear your questions and to put those questions into the conversation that we're holding today. So you'll notice you can't speak out loud and you can't share your screen, but you can sure use the chat. So I see that folks are already letting us know where you're from, which is wonderful. It gives us a sense of camaraderie here across continents on this Friday and maybe Saturday. So use that chat function to put in your questions. We have some folks who will be moderating and farming those questions out for me to share with our fantastic panelists. So let's go ahead and get started today. And first up, I want to welcome Dr. Luis Souza, who is going to tell us more about the working group on sustainability and to highlight some cases in South America. Dr. Souza is a conservation scientist trained in Brazil, Belgium, and the United States. He is the coordinator of LACICOR, the Conservation Science Laboratory at the CICOR, the Center for Conservation and Restoration of Cultural Properties School of Fine Arts of the Federal University of Minas Gerais and Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And he is one of the founders and currently president of Antecipa, the Brazilian Association of Research in Technology and Heritage Science. He is also working on the restoration of the National Museum of Rio, which is a tremendous major project that aims to integrate the museum into the surrounding community. So, Dr. Souza, Luis, let me turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for the introduction. I'd like to thank also the Working Group on Sustainability for suggesting my name for this event, as well as CAMOC for the promotion of the event together with the Working Group on Sustainability and ICOM. And I also would like to greet all of the colleagues in the table and the audience. It's very important to have this opportunity to talk to everyone on a worldwide perspective. Alessandro, if you can please share the screen with us. The presentation will be on the slides on PowerPoint, and it's going to be handled by the host. Okay, so this is the title, the subject, and myself. I have already been introduced, so let's move to the second one, please. This presentation will go in three parts. First of all, I will talk about the work of the Working Group on Sustainability, the context of our work, how it was created, and some of the achievements. And also I present two cases, one related to big city and another one related to small cities. And then I present some suggestions and conclusions. The Working Group on Sustainability was established in 2018 with a mandate until 2019, and then it was renewed until 2022. I'm pleased to greet Maureen Rees, who is the chair of the working group, as well as Caitlin Southwick. In the name of both, I greet all of our other colleagues in the group in order to save time. So please, next one. I start with the ICOM resolution, which was approved in Kyoto 2019. I'm not going to go phrase by phrase, but I want you to really pay attention to the fact that it's the resolution number 1, and it deals with sustainability and the implementation of Agenda 2030, transforming our world, which has been adopted by the 34th General Assembly of ICOM in Kyoto. So the resolution starts by considering the humanity's current demands on the planet. You know, practically everyone agrees with that. You know, the situation is practically unsustainable. The planet and all its inhabitants, human and non-human, are facing an entangled series of unprecedented environmental and social crises. And the impacts are really very, very amazing and a big problem for all of us. Like, for example, rising inequalities, wars, poverty, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. And this is all amplifying this crisis. So we can move to the next one, so that I'm just going to go through some of the points of the resolution. The 34th General Assembly recommends that ICOM and its committee, alliances, affiliated organizations, and secretaries recognize that all museums have a role to play in shaping and creating a sustainable future through our various programs, partnerships, and operations. The resolution is posted at the ICOM website, and it's very important. I'm going to go to the last point, which is empower ourselves, our visitors, and our communities through making positive contributions to achieving the goals of Agenda 2030, transforming our world, acknowledging and reducing our environmental impact, including our carbon footprint, and helping secure a sustainable future for all inhabitants of the planet, human and non-human. Next one, please, Alessandro. So we have a mission. What's the mission of the Working Group on Sustainability? It's to help ICOM to consider how to mainstream sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement, and to support its members, all of us, to contribute constructively in upholding the sustainable development goals. So leave no one behind is one of the imperatives that should resonate with all of museum practitioners. Please, next one. So what are the sustainable development goals? Also known as global goals, they were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action and end poverty. Alessandro, there is something on my screen which is like a message that I can't read. I think it's in your screen, sorry about that, perché è in italiano. But I'm stopping my timer. Okay, we'll move on then. So here are some of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They are all integrated. This is very important for all of us to keep in our mind. They are integrated. There is no sense in talking just about one of each without thinking about the other ones. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So these are the three pillars, social, economic, and sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So here we go for a closer look at them. There are 17, and here just by keywords, each one of them is like a universe of demands, of descriptions, of documents that we can find. And I left a list of links at the end of my presentation. So let's move over them very quickly. No hunger, no poverty, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, which is very related to cities. And I move to the 7th one, renewable energy, good jobs, innovation. And then the 11th, sustainable cities and communities. It's one of the SDGs, and it's very important together with the other ones because they are integrated. And then we go to climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice, and finally, partnerships for the goals. Move, please. So the strategic objectives of our working group are to link with other institutions. So we have to work with the other institutions so that we can help and be helped to develop our mission. Inclusion is very important as an objective. Sustainability report, we are directly linked to the ICOM Executive Council, and we deliver our reports to them. I can't read one of the words there, but I know it's encourage museums to address the carbon footprint of their operations, including methods of green building design, energy efficient and less toxic collections, care and exhibitions, energy efficient transportation, and so on. So this is part of our strategic objectives. Please move. Next one. And we have an action plan to be proposed for the period until 2022, which is very close. The group is working hard. We have several members. Some of them have asked leave, but we are working very hard on that. So you can move to the next one, please. I've picked up at the ICOM website our collections matter, which relates directly to the SDGs and to sustainability. I've picked some of the points that I think are very closely related to the presentation of today and to the general objectives of us by working on the working group on sustainability. So these are presented in the screen. Let's move to the next one, please. And then I catch a phrase which is in the announcement of this event. In a world that's increasingly urbanized, the need to develop inclusive, safe, and resilient communities and human settlements is a pressing imperative. Cities are drivers of economic, social, and cultural growth, but they are also one of the places where the most alarming social and economic inequalities are exposed. And then we move to some of the cases that I want to show you. I still have 5 minutes, almost 6. This mining is a big problem in Brazil, not just in Brazil, but in South America. And I see cases in Canada, in Australia, in Europe. So it's a big problem for all of us. On your left-hand side, you have a picture of the background of my city, Belo Horizonte. You can see how iron mining is destroying the landscape. And on your right-hand side, you can see even very important natural sites such as this peak are being destroyed. If not by the work of the state attorneys, it would have already been destroyed. Next one, please. Here is a map of, is a picture of the Observatory of Mining Conflicts in Brazil. Most of them deal with land, with water, with knowledge, with the social questions of the families. You can see here a map of the mining conflicts only in Brazil. And I guess the situation is like this in many other countries. Please, next. And I want to show you one example. You see, here is a very small municipality. It's a district actually called Bento Rodrigues here in my state of Minas Gerais. And here is a mining dam, you know, where they store their waste. This dam in 2015, it was broken. Please, next. And it went straight to that that district. You can see before and after. Next one, please. I'm going to show you some quick pictures. This is the situation. You know, it's destroyed completely, a whole community. Everything was destroyed. You see a church in the background, and you see, yeah, next one, please. Next. Next. You see, next. Okay, no, just go before. So we helped, we worked with the police, we worked with volunteers, but this is not enough. Why? Let's go to the next one, please. Iron ore will last for just a few more decades. In about 30 years, iron mining activities, at least here in Minas Gerais, will be gone. So the cities, they need to develop plans to live after the iron mine is gone. With the help of whom? Architects, engineers, students, museum professionals, all sorts of professionals within the universities, and our museums, galleries. The cultural sector is very important for that. So which topics we should focus in to help the city mayors and populations? Environmental education and training, sustainable tourism, cultural industry, health and safety, cooperativism, agroecology, and many other topics. Please, next one. Now I move to the other example, to the fire at the National Museum in Rio. It happened in September 2nd in 2018, so it's more than 3 years now. Next one. And here's just a peek of what happened there, and the new project is already in progress. Our group, next one, please. Our group has been invited to work, and the project, the big project, you know, it's until 2026, is in collaboration by UNESCO Brazil, Federal University of Rio, where the museum is part of the Federal University of Rio, and also collaboration with Vale, international Brazilian company, mining company, actually. The governance is by executive committee, which is deliberative, an institutional committee, which is consultative with public, private, and governmental organization. And there is a working group on safety and sustainability post-inauguration, which is coordinated by a Brazilian bank. Next one, please. Our group, Conservation Science Laboratory and Conservation Center, we've been invited to be part of the technical interdisciplinary group for conservation restoration, risk, and environment management. So the members of this group are ICOM, Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, National Archives of Brazil, National Museum staff, service providers like architects, mechanical engineers, electric engineers, HVAC equipment providers, etc. Next one, please. And I'm going to move directly to some innovative and effective knowledge experience-based solutions for these problems we are facing. It's a big project. We have the discussions in progress, and the preliminary consensus for HVAC, ventilation and climate control. I think that the best message here is that we will work with hybrid system involving allowing wider fluctuations of temperature and relative humidity. We will use most of the passive systems for showcase, so not big air conditioning units, and because we are focused on energy savings, maintenance, sustainability. Next one, please. And we do have knowledge. So I finished with 3 slides, and because my time is finishing, I'm just going to show them quickly here. These are areas that we should move, you know. Sorry. We should move into training, both combining material science, history, and social science to all of these professionals and also to our students. Next one, please. We should also work in terms of education for the valorization of the cultural heritage, through the respect to diversity. And the list is on your right-hand side, managers, corporate executives, politicians, university officers, funding agency officers, legislators, public in general. And the next one, please. And then management, working towards integrated policies at the state, city, economic, and social level in order to lower inequalities and to promote inclusion. And then we can collaborate with questions like regulation, fiscalization, and promptness to disaster response. Next one, I think it's the last one. Yes, I have here a list of some of the links which will be of interest for everyone. And I thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis. You've just given us such a broad introduction to sort of work out into, and I think we're going to see so many of the needs and the experience and the knowledge questions that you have pointed out within the South American context taking shape with some of our other examples today. In fact, our next speaker is going to continue a little bit with a focus on South America. Andrea de la Place is our next up on our agenda today. She has a PhD in Museum Studies and Heritage from Université Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Her thesis research examined New York's Ellis Island Immigration Museum, the Museo de Imigração in Sao Paulo, and the Musée National de l'Histoire et de l'Immigration in Paris. She is an active member in ICOM CAMOC and participated in the project Migration Cities that took place between 2017 and 2019. And most recently, she has been working as a researcher at the Picasso Museum in Paris on a new exhibition opening in fall 2021. So welcome, Andrea. Let me turn things over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank ICOM and CAMOC for inviting me to participate at this roundtable today, and also ICOM for receiving me here at their office in Paris. I hope you're all listening to me because I'm using my mobile phone, so hopefully everything will be good. Alessandro, if you can please put the slides for, thank you very much. Thank you. So it's a short presentation that I'll be doing, and it's going to focus in the connections in between migration and climate change. So climate change, migration, and sustainability are key concepts that are reshaping our contemporary societies. Migration, refugees, and forced displacement are a reality of human societies over the centuries, and they affect economies and also sustainability. Refugees and displacement are likely to become a defining issue of the 21st century, says Alexander Betts, director of the Refugee Study Center at the University of Oxford from 2014 to 2017. Mass migration driven by conflict, oppression, political upheaval, economic distress, and environmental disasters have been described as defining issues of this century, along with climate change and the need to think of sustainable solutions in our cities and communities. These traumatic relocations reshape the lives of the people who are displaced and of their new host communities, and ignite both the best and the worst of human behavior. Museums can use their influence to build bridges between established residents and newcomers, easing fears, building trust, finding common ground in between these newcomers and the inhabitants of a city, of a country. And new migrants can help museums re-examine their relationships to belonging, to heritage, and to social and ecological transformations. As members of museums communities, migrants and refugees bring their own particular needs. notably to remember and preserve their history and culture, even as they settle into their new country. Migrants may need language and job training, as well as advocates to promote tolerance and understanding within the host community. They may need help also recovering from trauma. Museums, through their collections and exhibitions, can provide context and historical perspective around the migrations shaping their communities. And in doing so, they can promote the kinds of personal encounters, dialogues, and empathy that promote healing and ease the fears and tension between refugees and established residents. Museums, and in particular city museums, are more and more often perceived as places of dialogue and of inclusiveness. Forums that welcome the citizens and inhabitants of a city, as mentioned, to discuss subjects that are important to their everyday life, but also to the society at large. Inclusiveness is important as it makes it possible for everyone to feel involved as part of the community. I won't have time here to go deep into this general introduction, but I would just like to highlight some points. Alessandro, can you please go to the next slide, please? Sorry, I think there is one before that. Yes, the second one, sorry. The second one, Alessandro, sorry. I think it's the one after this one. The next slide. More and more museums are inviting the citizens to participate and share inside the museum space, using spaces and resources to unite and show that not only are we stronger together, but the future depends on our unity. So the respect of differences from origin, social background, gender is essential for a more inclusive society, especially at times like these where extreme divergences seem to take place in the public forums and social networks, opposing more than uniting. Offering a safe space for the so-called minorities to express themselves is also important, from hosting multicultural entertainments, being theater, stand-up comedy, music, or food festivals, to leading, for example, a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram live chat on inclusivity. Museums are finding creative ways to connect with its community at large and in service of important causes such as climate change and migration, for example. So now I would like to focus in the direct link between climate change and migration. And I will try to give a practical example of how a museum is dealing with this thematic. Alessandro, please, can we go to the next step? Thank you. So previous research has postulated that climate change will lead to mass migration. The connections between climate change, sea level rise, and floods, for example, as we recently saw this last summer here in Europe, the catastrophic floods in Belgium and Germany, or the recent ravaging fires in Greece, Australia, and North America, and other parts of the world, are an example of these disastrous effects of climate change and have been investigated and depicted by diverse scholars and research groups. However, studies also show that the connection is by no means deterministic, but depends on the numerous factors relating to the vulnerability of the communities and the region affected in question. The more solidarity and sustainable solutions a community can find, the more likely they are going to be able to face those adversities. I would like to finish my talk then focusing on migration and indigenous communities and climate change. The connection between concepts as migration, decolonization, and climate change, for some, may seem not direct at first, but they are intrinsically connected. That is why I would like to give a practical example of how a migration museum, that it's also a city museum because it's focused also on the history of migration in São Paulo, Brazil, is developing a course on migration and indigenous communities. The concept of migrations encompasses a much larger scope of types of migration, and one is related to being obliged to leave your place of origin because of deep modification in the ecosystem and biodiversity. The continual destruction of the rainforest directly affects the many ecosystems that have been providing food and shelter for indigenous communities, for example. The next slide, please, Alessandro. Tropical rainforests are the most biologically diverse. I think it's the next one. I think there was a, yes, thank you. Tropical rainforests are the most biologically diverse terrestrial ecosystems in the world. The Amazon rainforest, for example, is the world's largest tropical rainforest, and its continued destruction has been deeply affecting the many indigenous communities that are forced to migrate. So in a series of roundtables, and then we can go to the previous slide, thank you. In a series of roundtables called Os Tijolos do Racismo Estrutural no Brasil, Deslocamentos Indígenas, or in English, the Bricks of Structural Racism in Brazil, Indigenous Migrations, the Museu da Imigração in São Paulo, Brazil, has recently proposed to open up this important discussion within its curatorial and activities program. Some of the questions addressed by these debates are: how can migrations be thought of from an indigenous individual or community perspective? I think the slide, Alessandra, we can go. I think I put the questions on the next one. Yes, thank you. How can migrations be thought of from an indigenous individual or community perspective? Does an indigenous individual or community in the urban context lose parts of its identity? How does the constitution of the colonial territories occurred in the past, and how does it affect the present? How are the process of expulsion and demarcation of land in Brazil forcing indigenous communities to migrate? So the focus of this series of roundtables is to understand how the process of expulsion of indigenous communities, demarcation of land, and destruction of the rainforests are deeply connected to the movements of internal migration in Brazil. In addition, it also questions how these communities circulate in cities and their surroundings, trying to adapt to a new reality. The speakers are from indigenous community and work and live in São Paulo. They aren't all necessarily Brazilians. They also come from other countries from Latin America, highlighting the exchange and migration within the continent. All these roundtables and talks are now available online. So it was recently, this roundtable took place now at late August and early September. So they're available online on YouTube, but only for Portuguese speakers. And then I would like to finish my talk highlighting the importance of sociomuseology that is at the heart of the practice of the Migration Museum in São Paulo, but also of museums in Brazil. And as we just saw, this museum is developing more and more initiatives to discuss and address contemporary issues, such as human migrations in the time of the pandemic, but also, as we just saw, the connections in between indigenous migration and political dispute with landowners, and also climate change in Brazil. As Luis just mentioned, the restoration of the National Museum in Rio, I would like to connect these two museums, because also this museum in Rio is very engaged in integrating the museum itself in the surrounding community. So again, highlighting the importance of the sociomuseology for museologists in Brazil and Latin America. To conclude, I would like to say that as climate change is creating an environment more and more hostile to diverse communities around the globe, museums are deeply involved in the process of discussion and finding sustainable solutions. And migration and city history museums are also directly connected to the issue of climate change and need to speak and address this urgent issue that is part of the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much for your attention, and we can discuss later on.
Thank you so much, Andrea. You've given us a lot to think about, and I know probably people in the audience have experiences both with the impact of sustainability on Indigenous communities and on migration and people who are on the move. And we'll look forward to talking about that and the role of dialogue as that shapes things up. So let me just take a moment, certainly, to remind all our audience, you're welcome to put questions into the chat, and we'll make those part of our discussion at the end of the presentations. But we'll move on with the presentations now with a continued focus on Indigenous perspectives on sustainability with Katherine Cole. Katherine C. Cole is Director of Planning for the Nunavut Heritage Center, being developed by the Indigenous Organization of Inuit Heritage Trust in the Nunavut territorial capital of Iqaluit. Since 1993, she has been principal consultant of Katherine C. Cole and Associates, writing municipal cultural plans and museum feasibility studies, as well as curating multidisciplinary arts and heritage projects, and much more. She presently serves as the vice chair of CAMOC and was also Secretary General of the ICOM affiliated organization, the Commonwealth Association of Museums, from 2013 to 2020. So welcome, Katherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to my colleagues in CAMOC and to the Sustainability Working Group and ICOM for the opportunity to speak to you today about the work that I'm currently doing in Nunavut. For my CAMOC friends, you're used to me talking about Southern Canada, but this time I'll take you on a journey to the north. Alessandro, could you share the screen, please? So we can move on to the next one. I've included lots of pretty pictures of the Arctic for those of you to get you in the mood for winter coming up. In Canada, it's traditional to acknowledge the land from which we are speaking. I live in Edmonton, which is also known as Treaty 6 territory. It is the traditional lands of Cree and Métis people. Excuse me. And the gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, including, in addition to the Cree and Métis, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwa, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, and Inuit, whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our community. I myself am of Métis ancestry. Next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of Inuktitut here. Inuit Nunangat is the word for the Inuit homelands of Canada, and there are 4 distinct homeland regions. So the big one in the middle is Nunavut, which is what I'm going to be speaking about. To the right of that, a little bit down below, is Nunavik, which is northern Quebec. And a little further to the right of that is Nunatsiavut, which is in northern Labrador. So Newfoundland and Labrador is one province. And then over on the far left, you have the Inuvialuit settlement region of the Northwest Territory. So there are 4 distinct Inuit groups and Inuit geographic regions, inclusive of the land, water, and ice. This encompasses 35% of Canada's landmass and 50% of its coastline. So for a part of Canada that we rarely speak about, and most Canadians never have the opportunity to visit because it is so expensive and hard to get to, it's a huge part of Canada. Next slide, please. So Nunavut, which is what I'm speaking about, was created in 1999, and it's separated from the Northwest Territories at that point. So it is 1/5 of the size of Canada, 2 million square kilometers, with a population of only 37,000 people throughout the territory. So that is 1 person for 70 square kilometers. It's a lot of land up there, a lot of water. The population is 85% Inuit. There are 4 official languages: Inuktitut, Inuinnaqtun, English, and French. There are 25 different communities, and none of these communities is accessible by road or rail. One of the most frequent questions that Nunavut tourism gets when people call asking about how to get to Iqaluit is, how do you drive? How do you get to Iqaluit? And the answer is, there is no way to drive there. You have to fly. These communities are only accessible by ship or by plane. Next slide, please. Iqaluit, which means a place of many fish, is the capital of Nunavut. It was designated the capital of Nunavut when Nunavut separated from the Northwest Territories in 1999. The population is only 7,740 people. That makes it the largest community in Nunavut, but it is the smallest city in Canada. 86% of the population is Inuit. 46% of residents identify Inuktitut as their mother tongue. But Iqaluit, like most cities in the world, are becoming increasingly diverse, with migrants coming into the territory. And in fact, Iqaluit even has a mosque that was opened in 2016. Next slide, please. The Inuit Heritage Trust, the organization that I work for, is an Indigenous organization that was established under the Nunavut Agreement. Our mandate is the preservation, enrichment, and protection of Inuit cultural heritage and identity. It's a focus on archaeology, ethnography, and traditional place names. And we operate within the values of respect for traditional knowledge and the wisdom of our elders. I began working with IHT as a consultant in 2005 when I developed a training program, a territory-wide training program for people who manage cultural and heritage centers throughout Nunavut. And now I'm working with them as the director of planning, and IHT is taking the lead on an Inuit-owned and operated territorial heritage center. So this image is of the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Center in Yellowknife, which is where the Nunavut collection was before Nunavut separated from NWT. Next slide, please. So, is that the next one? Okay, so currently, the situation that we're living in Nunavut is that there's a legacy of colonialism, and this is very strong because it's very immediate. There's a rupture of families who had previously lived on the land for centuries that settled or were relocated in communities in the 1950s. And this is recent. There are people who remember living on the land before they were forced into a community. There are people who I've met who, the first child to be born in a hospital, that kind of thing. The residential school system, which for Inuit began in the 1950s, and then what is known as the 60s scoop was when Inuit children were taken away from their families and fostered by families in the South. So they're either taken away for school or taken away to live in other families. And then at the same time, there was a tuberculosis crisis in the mid-20th century, which took Inuit to southern Canada for medical treatment because there was no medical treatment available to them in the north. And many of those people never returned. So that has left this huge fracturing within the community. And in Nunavut, there is a marginalization of Inuit culture, values, and traditions that people struggle with. So the purpose of the Heritage Center, the Nunavut Heritage Center, is intended to help Inuit to renegotiate their individual and collective cultural identities. Next slide, please. There has been a significant growth in the number of Inuit and First Nations run heritage centers in other parts of Canada in recent years. In the north, both Nunavik, which is northern Quebec, and Nunavut, northern Labrador, have heritage centers. So this is a beautiful new one that was just opened in Nunavut in the fall of 2019, immediately before COVID. So unfortunately, it hasn't really had time to develop a lot of programming. But there's a serious infrastructure gap in Nunavut. Next slide. The concept is to develop an approximately 7,000 square meter facility that's going to focus on living heritage, the continuity of Inuit culture and language, as well as the preservation and exhibition of cultural belongings. But we're starting with the we're starting with the continuity of culture rather than with the preservation of culture. We also intend to develop satellite centers in the 3 regions of Nunavut and to coordinate territory-wide collaborative exhibitions and programs. The intention is to support healing and reconciliation by bridging generations, allowing Inuit to connect with their elders and ancestors, as well as non-Inuit through objects and stories. Next slide. We're working on a feasibility study, so we're still discussing whether this will be 1 or 2 buildings. There's a possibility that we would have 1 building that would be owned and operated by the government of Nunavut in collaboration with Inuit, or Inuit owned, and there might be 2 buildings. So if it's 2 buildings, we're looking at a first phase that would be an Inuit-owned public facility, which would have exhibitions, education training space, an artifact study center / archival reading room, artifact preparation space, performance space, all of these things. The unique aspect of this would be in things like outdoor performance space, outdoor workshop space, because a lot of traditional activities take place on the land. And one of the big challenges with Andrea's question about Indigenous cultural activities being able to continue inside cities, well, it's really, really difficult, even a city the size of Iqaluit, to maintain traditional cultural activities because they're so land-based. And if you're in a city, you can't do that kind of stuff. So we're going to have outdoor spaces, a skin preparation area, carvers' sheds. So the outdoors will be very important to us, as well as we're looking at having an elders / artists residence and a daycare even. We're looking at what are the needs in Iqaluit as a city and how can the Heritage Center address those needs. The second phase would then be to develop a curatorial center which would be operated in collaboration with Inuit, but that would have the collections, storage, and the archives and conservation labs and all of those more curatorial things. So the image you see at the bottom there is the Canadian Museum of History in in Gatineau, but in the Ottawa area, which is 2 buildings. There's a curatorial center, there's also a public space. And in this case, they were built at the same time and they're joined underground. Ours would probably be built at 2 different times, unfortunately, but designed as one. Next slide. So then there's all these satellite centers. And at the moment, there are lots of little centers in communities throughout Nunavut. And some of these might be renovated or receive additional support, but there's also new facilities that are being developed. And our idea is to collaborate with the local centers to develop territory-wide exhibitions and programs. It's really important that even though the center is being built in Iqaluit, it support Inuit throughout the territory. Next slide. The Nunavut collection there's about 140,000 cultural belongings in this collection, and it belongs in Nunavut. But since it was moved out of the Northwest Territories, it is now being stored in the Ottawa area and in Winnipeg. So this image is of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, which just opened a new Inuit Arts Center called CAMOC. And it opened in March of 2021. And so this is a fabulous visible storage vault, which shows a huge number of Inuit carvings, some of which belong to the WAG, but many of which also belong to us. Next slide. The Canadian Museum of Nature is housing the archaeology, paleontology, natural history, ethnography, and history collection. So those are all in Gatineau, which is just outside of Ottawa. And then Parks Canada is currently housing the artifacts that have been retrieved from the Franklin shipwrecks. And those are also co-owned with the Inuit Heritage Trust, but they're in Ottawa as well. So that's still, it's a $1,500 airfare from Ottawa to Iqaluit. So it's people from Nunavut cannot get to Ottawa to see these collections. Next slide. The vision is a place where past, present, and future Inuit culture, both tangible and intangible, is passed on to all Nunavumiat of today and tomorrow and shared with the world. The word Nunavumiat means people who live in Nunavut. The mission is to share traditional knowledge and provide access to tangible and intangible heritage throughout the territory, to promote greater awareness of Inuit culture, as well as cultural healing and reconciliation between Inuit and non-Inuit. So the importance of healing and reconciliation is built right into the mission. That is what we are all about, not just to preserve the objects. Next slide, please. So just to continue on the purpose vein, we want to assert Inuit rights and reconciliation, to further Nunavut's commitment to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, to create opportunities for collaboration with museums internationally. And then, as I mentioned, to consolidate these collections. So this is an image of excuse me, an economy museum in Greenland, which includes country food, skin preparation, butchering, clothing manufacturing, all of these things that are not normally part of a museum mandate. Next slide. And obviously, to preserve and research the collection, provide professional development and training, to promote the use of Inuit languages, which is also critical. The loss of Indigenous languages is a huge issue for all Indigenous peoples internationally. And so we want to have a language aspect to the Heritage Centre. And then to increase Canadians' awareness of climate change. So climate change in the Arctic is occurring at 3 times the global rate. And traditional knowledge lives on the land. So we're looking at the intersection of traditional Inuit knowledge and Western scientific knowledge, and how we can improve people's understanding of the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Social programs. So we want to provide support for those who are living with mental wellness, multi-generational trauma, dementia, accessibility, restorative justice, all of these areas where we see the Heritage Centre having positive social benefits. Inuit pride and identity, to collaborate with local partners to address these issues by connecting with tangible and intangible heritage. Next slide. Employment, obviously the economic aspects of this are important, as well as the construction of the centre itself. There will be over 30 full-time positions to operate the centre. As well, elders and traditional knowledge holders will be contracted on shorter-term basis to provide knowledge and expertise. By local, we're going to be supporting local businesses and particularly local artists through the Heritage Centre. Tourism. because of the cost and the inaccessibility of getting there, we have a very small tourism industry, but we do have a tourism industry. But in fact, most of the tourists who go to Nunavut are people like myself, who travel on business. So I've visited 15 of these communities over the last 15 years. And so if a business traveler is going there, you've already made the trip has been paid for by somebody else. So it's easy enough to add an extra day to your trip to be able to spend some time in the Heritage Center. And we hope people will do that. Next slide. The center is being developed by the Inuit Heritage Trust with the support of Inuit organizations, the City of Iqaluit, the Government of Nunavut, the Government of Canada, where we expect to do an international public capital campaign to raise additional funds. We are, as I said, working on the feasibility study, and one of the things we're looking at is the cost of land preparation. It's really challenging to build in the Arctic, and as much as we would like to build a green building, that's an additional challenge in terms of what is possible. We're developing the operating budget, and we see a real mix of funding. It's going to be a diversified funding base to ensure long-term financial stability. Next slide, please. And so to conclude, this image is of the new airport terminal in Iqaluit, and you see that hill up above, that's where we're going to build. We've looked at 3 different locations in that area below this housing that's up on the ridge. And so we'll be benefiting the city of Iqaluit by building a road and taking utilities into an area where there is nothing at this point. And housing is a serious issue in Iqaluit as well. We have people living in overcrowded houses, so it'll be great to open up a new suburb. So the Heritage Center is being built as much as possible, considering sustainability. Although, as I mentioned, there are particular challenges with building in the Arctic. We are supporting all 4 pillars of sustainable development: economic, social, environmental, and cultural. And we will address several of the SDGs, which I think you've heard echoing through my comments. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion to follow.
Thank you, Katherine. I think you've raised so many interesting points that wouldn't necessarily have been the things I would have thought of when it comes to talking about cities and sustainability. The Indigenous focus and the small city needs are so fascinating, and I hope people who are watching will have a lot of great questions about your work. And to kind of wrap us up, we're going to turn to another museum project site that is in the process of creation and growth. Anais Reyes is coming to us from the Climate Museum in New York City, where she is Senior Exhibitions Associate. Anais previously worked at the American Museum of Natural History and the New Museum of Contemporary Art, as well as the Whitney Museum of American Art. She has a BFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with concentrations in curation and entrepreneurship, and is currently studying the intersections of climate change, ecology, and culture at Columbia University in the city of New York. Anais, it's all yours.
Thank you for that introduction. First, I want to express my gratitude, of course, to the organizers for having me here today, and to all of you for coming and joining us. If we could pull up the PowerPoint. No, that would be great. So as Glenn said, the Climate Museum is based in New York City. We're the first museum in the United States dedicated to climate change. Our mission is to inspire action on the climate crisis with programming across the arts and sciences that deepens understanding, builds connections, and advances just solutions. Next slide. So this is an image of Hurricane Ida from September 1st, just a couple of weeks ago. It was downgraded to a tropical storm by the time it reached New York City, and yet it still killed over 40 people across the Northeastern US alone. And so, as many of us know, global temperatures have already risen enough since the pre-industrial era for us to be facing the impacts of climate change today, unequally, of course, and it will only accumulate beyond livable conditions if we don't make drastic changes to the way that our lives and economies and societies and cities function. So the question is, how can museums contribute to making cities resilient, inclusive, and sustainable in the face of climate change? Next slide. There's one statistic that's fundamental to the Climate Museum's programmatic vision. It is that 66% of Americans are currently worried about climate change, but only 6% of people are discussing it. So basically, even though they're worried, that leftover 60% of people are silent and they don't feel they have an outlet to address that worry, and it creates this feedback loop of inaction. So what we need to do is what some experts call break the climate silence, and that's where we come in. Next slide. As many of you know, museums are powerful institutions in this position for a few reasons. They're popular, they're highly credible sources of information, and they're trusted as sources of knowledge. And they act as an accessible and democratic gathering space and public commons. When those strengths are combined to discuss social issues, whether climate change or migration or what any of my co-presenters have been talking about today, museums have the potential to build communities and coalitions and bring about a sense of shared motivation and agency. Next slide. In our case, we mobilize these strengths to provide diverse pathways into climate dialogue and action, as I said. Our programming aims to move that worried but silent 60% from stagnation and uncertainty toward a deeper, more active, more communal understanding of climate change today. And by creating free and accessible programming that promotes civic and collective approaches to climate solutions and offering specific and directed actions, we help pull visitors out of that feedback loop of silence and teach them how to be advocates for change, whether in large cities or wherever they're coming from. And with each of our programs, and in the long term, our goal is to create spaces that foster a new kind of highly engaged climate citizenship that pushes a wider shift towards a culturally ingrained sustainability at the societal and structural scale. Next slide. We consider ourselves an activist museum because we use art and exhibitions as an entry point to this greater shift. But we realize that only creating an emotional response isn't enough anymore. Next slide. So we need to address the urgency and severity of the crisis using all the tools that we have available, including the social and cultural ones. We believe that civic engagement and activism and cultural growth are all part of the same infinite loop propelling people and cities towards justice, sustainability, safety, and resilience. And we use our platform to get people to see themselves as climate leaders towards this imperative. Next slide. So now I'll take you through some of our recent programs to explore how we've used our role as a cultural institution towards these goals in New York City and beyond. Next slide. Yeah, there. So in 2019, we presented an exhibition called Taking Action in a house on Governor's Island in New York City. It's just a small island off of Manhattan. And that was our first to connect visitors with direct actions that they could take to mitigate climate change. It was inspired by the youth climate movement and hosted by high school students who were trained as docents to lead visitors through the exhibitions. And we were joined that summer by many tour groups from schools and environmental NGOs, and a lot of families, a lot of people. It was great. The exhibition started off with large-scale climate solutions already in place in New York City and around the world, then went into current political and social barriers to progress, and then finally a space where we directed people in taking one or more of 5 curated actions. So they were call your representative to take the no fossil fuel money pledge, talk to 3 people about climate change, join a climate or justice adjacent organization, sign a petition, and switch your bank to remove your finances from ones that invest heavily in fossil fuels. Next slide. And with each action people committed to, they would receive a sticker to place on this wall in the same room. It was important to us that this interaction created a visual representation of the community, of a shared purpose and possibility with others. It was a visual representation of collective efficacy also, and it exhibited the importance of seeing the impact of your actions as a part of this larger movement with others. And so through these actions, we're able to create this sense of motivation and direction and togetherness rather than leaving people to despair about, all these negative effects and be stuck in doom and gloom. And now this action ask, this directed little end piece, the conclusion of every exhibition is now a key feature in all of our programming. Next slide. So since the pandemic began, we dove into virtual programming. We don't have a permanent space in New York City, so we did rely on a lot of pop-ups on Governor's Island, on public art. And so this gave us a chance to work on our virtual space. So this is an image of our Talking Climate series that discusses the intersections of climate and inequality. We bring in scientists, journalists, artists, activists, interdisciplinary experts from all backgrounds and all ages. We partner with diverse organizations to discuss climate in relation to other social issues, things that may not immediately be associated with climate change, including infrastructure, displacement. This one was on public health and grief and many more. So it was meant to ground climate in its deeper historical context while also responding to the landscape we find ourselves in today and acknowledging who is most affected in the present. And we orient each conversation around advancing intersectional climate justice. Next slide. Finally, this is a glimpse into our current project called Beyond Lies. It's a public art campaign with the illustrator and data journalist Mona Chalabi. It takes the extensive work done by investigative journalists and academic researchers on the fossil fuel industry's longstanding disinformation crusade, and it distills it into 3 posters. Obviously, you can see this one here, there's 2 more. And we basically invite our audience to physically share these posters throughout their neighborhood, keeping COVID precautions in mind, of course. The campaign offers directed actions to break the industry's grip on climate policy through this QR code on the side, included in the poster. And our website includes downloadable posters for printing and for digital sharing. It has additional resources, video testimonials from experts on the cultural and political context of the industry's disinformation tactics, and also a gallery where we invite people to share how far their posters have reached across the globe. I think we've gone as far, the last I saw, we've reached the Netherlands and Austria. Next slide. So all these programs have had really moving and hopeful and validating responses from viewers, but I'll just share these 2. The one on the left was from our first exhibition, and on the right was from Taking Action, the one that I talked about. So as I've said, the urgency of the climate crisis calls for active, accessible, inclusive engagement and community building. And at the Climate Museum, we've seen firsthand how museums can foster those connections. Next slide. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you, Anais. It was a wonderful quick tour through some amazing possibilities for what museums can, for ways museums can engage with these critical questions that are tied to the development goals. I'm sort of, my mind's spinning right now because between the 4 presenters, we've touched on so many possibilities and so many intersections of ways sustainability, museums, and cities come together. But inspired, I guess, by Anais's presentation there, and kind of going back to this idea of empowerment and action, I wanted to, I guess, start by sort of opening up a question to all of you, but I think I'll start with Luis because we haven't heard from him in a little bit, and he's working with the WGS about specific visions for museums taking action and embodying action on this question of climate change. What do you see as some of the biggest potentials for these kinds of steps?
Well, specifically on climate change and thinking about museums and their mission to preserve, to give access. If we think about big museums and specifically about these questions on energy savings, I think there is already a big movement towards, in terms of climate, for example, climate management, as I said, towards leaving more fluctuations. But this is only possible if you have a team of people who have experience with the collection, with the history of the collection. So this ancient idea of international exhibitions, like in the 90s, all of the museums here, you would talk to a director and say, we have to have an exhibition room for international collections. And then we always kept that 55, 60% relative humidity and so on. This is changing a lot for many years, but still the literature must change, because lots of people, when they go to the literature, they still get the old, but this is more towards the technical aspect. So we have to train engineers, architects, and so on. On the social aspect of climate change, we need to work on education, as I showed, So the group, even within our group, is very diverse. We have people from developed countries, from other countries, which are still going on several issues. So both from the technical point of view, we have to accumulate more knowledge and be able to support some of these late evidences about climate management. And from the social, I think it's important that we focus on education. So the working group of sustainability, actually, if you allow me, I just would like to give some words from our chair, Maureen Rees, because he asked us to talk and I didn't have time to say this. So our group wishes to come in contact with members who would like to actively join in the task we are committed to. And there is the idea in the process of developing the idea of sustainability ambassador program, which would count on the international committees. We have so many international committees within ICOM, and each of them can contribute with their own expertise. And us, the Working Group on Sustainability, we are open to collaborate.
I think that question of knowledge is so important, and I heard it from each of you as you spoke. I think, Katherine, I wanted to follow up a little bit with you on this sort of, on the question of Indigenous knowledge and knowledge that is coming out of the land. How do you see that as connecting with this sort of, global knowledge, scientific knowledge that Luis is talking about sharing among museum practitioners?
Well, I think it's really absolutely critical, particularly when we're looking at places that are the land of somebody else. And to have scientists come into the north and do studies, and many of them increasingly doing it remotely because they're using drones and things, but not actually communicating with the people who live there and the people whose land it is just absurd. It would be like you wanting to study my cooking and just marching into my kitchen and opening all the drawers and doing things and not speaking to me. The land belongs to them. This is their world. And they have incredible knowledge that has been gained. It's not easy to survive in that climate. It has taken them centuries to learn how to do it. And there's so much that we could learn from them if we only listened. And I know that there's in some cases, there are scientists who think that they have all the answers and don't feel that they need to listen to the Indigenous people. Their perspective is different. And I just think that's from my experience, not just in the north, but I worked in the Solomon Islands for a couple of years in Melanesia. And this was, in 1990, we had a conference in Fiji on the role of traditional science and Western science. And part of the concern is that people steal Indigenous knowledge, use of medicinal plants, all that kind of thing. So in some cases, there's a reluctance to share that information. You really have to have respect, and you have to build trust, and you have to work collaboratively and openly and honestly with people, or it just won't work. But it's something for Indigenous peoples around the world that is a huge concern. And there's this concern about copyright, intellectual property ownership, all of those kinds of issues as well. But a real concern that we're not being heard. And so if researchers go into communities, do their research and leave, and don't even leave behind a copy of what they've done, it's just so disrespectful. And it's been happening for decades.
It's this kind of question of who leads on these fronts, I think, is really a critical one. And this idea of what the role of the community can be in shaping our approach to these, these goals that are international and that, are supposed to be agreed on globally. but there's so many community perspectives and approaches to. And Ais, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, in particular, how have you seen community-led efforts shaping the programs at your site, and or are you familiar with ones that have taken place at others that are influential?
Yeah, so I would say that, I see this all in connection to what Katherine said, is like a shift in perspective. And I feel lucky that the people that I work with understand, like, seeing climate change differently, respecting Indigenous knowledge, understanding the plight of climate refugees, or at least attempting, it's all interconnected, and we can't separate them from each other, and we can't tackle one thing without tackling the rest. And so this idea of building a community is just inseparable from climate change. We can't fix it unless we are working to build communities, and we are respecting each other's knowledges and acknowledging where everyone else is coming from in the way that is most appropriate for that person or that group or community. I think from my own experience, we try to, work collaboratively with different organizations, with different NGOs, different people of different perspectives who, we've gotten as far as we have because we recognize, like, we know this much, we are missing this, we can reach out to these people. And if everyone's, willing to work together, then we can pull something together and share it with the public. But it is very much a group effort. It is acknowledging who has what strengths and turning that into a public program as best we can, and then learning from the successes and failures of that.
It's a challenge, and I know you mentioned dialogue, as well as kind of being a key part of how those programs shape up. And Andrea, I was moved by your discussion of how dialogue forms a role in bringing new communities and new voices into the conversation about migration, certainly. And when you have either internally displaced or externally displaced people, I mean, even here in Greensboro right now, we're talking about welcoming in Afghan evacuees, recently displaced from their homes, and making them welcome here in Greensboro. And that's going to have to be done through a lot of dialogue, a lot of engagement, a lot of working on services. What stories did you hear when looking at the Sao Paulo example that sort of really moved you or made you think? Were there any that made you think differently, I guess, about even that of sustainability or the role of museums?
Thank you, Glenn, for this question. As I mentioned, I invite you all, especially for those who are Portuguese speakers, to check online on the YouTube channel of the museum, the Museu da Imigração, because they have recorded. And I think one of the most powerful talks that I heard during this series of roundtables was from Bolivian feminist and activist, and she was talking about her personal experience. So she comes from an indigenous community, originally from Bolivia, and she moved to Sao Paulo. I think she's living there already for quite a few years, because she had perfect Portuguese. She was speaking brilliantly, and she was just showing by her own experience all the prejudice that she felt, especially regarding the stereotypes people have regarding her role in the society, because she has an indigenous background as well, because she's coming from Bolivia. She was saying that even internal migrants from different countries in Latin America, when they moved to Brazil and especially to Sao Paulo, they are also received with a little bit of not feeling that welcome, and just being I don't want to use a strong word, but just being put in a place where they feel really, really uncomfortable. They don't feel welcome. And that coming from a place and a country that normally says, yes, we welcome everyone, we're very open. But in the reality, when you talk to the people coming from different backgrounds and their experience as an individual in their new community, it's very touching. And that's why I think that the importance of dialogues in museum, so be it online series of roundtable on Twitter, on Instagram, I'm talking about the social network, because people use it a lot on their everyday lives. And even having discussions and trying to open a dialogue on those spaces, it's very important. It might seem superficial when we're putting that against other initiatives, but they do help. And I think that's the importance of listening to this personal testimonies of how you can feel just not welcome in your new hometown, or how you can feel prejudiced on your everyday life just because of your origin, your background, your gender. And that's why I think I wanted to give during my short speech this example from the series of roundtables in São Paulo. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I think when you talk about things, these different platforms through which we are creating dialogues at museums, and different ways that we are able to bring people together, increase these knowledges, and like Anna, you said, sort of encourage people to engage in actions. I do want to kind of extend this a little bit to this, the idea that ICOM has been working on recently, this museum definition, and what is a museum? Because I wonder if, the imperatives of this sustainability, how they contribute to that conversation about what is a museum. How is it changing, this concept of what is a museum? And I guess I want all of you to kind of, respond to this question, and of course anybody in the audience who wants to ask it as well. Let's see, let's go back to Luis. We can start with him, and sort of what changes do you feel like this conversation has to do with what a museum is or can be?
Well, this specifically about sustainability, we've had a meeting with Define and discussed some issues. So from our perspective, we will do our best to include sustainability as one of the, present, not just word, but concept within the museum definition. We know there are differences between countries, there are differences between museums and professionals, but it's imperative that we discuss it further and that we are able to perceive specific questions that the international committees may have, in order to bypass, in order to positively bypass, to overcome this and get sustainability within the definition. But, we have to work it out, and we are happy because we've had the meeting already with Define, and we're on this way.
Andrea, what about you from the perspective, certainly, of the social museology that you were talking about? Do you see, what connections do you see in the terms of the definition?
I think it's the importance of including the community in everything that the museum is producing. And it was interesting to listen to Anais and also to Katherine and Luis, because they are coming from other experiences than mine, and that just showed how hard it is, even sometimes if the museum is open to creating these connections. Sometimes it doesn't go as easy as planned, but when it works, it can bring such richness to the process. And especially when we're talking about sustainability, it's something that concerns everyone. So I think for me, that's the importance of the socio-museology approach, just to see the museum as part of the community where it is located. So it is always this dialogue, this exchange in between museum and community, and talking about things that concerns the whole community at large.
And Ais, what do you think?
I totally agree with Andrea with basically everything you said. There's this like think global, act local saying that I think also ties in with your idea, but I do totally agree that I think it's a community matter. I think there has to be a focus on education and participation, active engagement, whether that means, I mean, it depends on like large, you know, institutions with a longer history have different issues than one like mine, where we have more space to create what we want to see and like, you know, make it happen. Make it happen in a month, make it happen in a week. But to me, there's this push and pull of like, if you want dialogues that get you somewhere, if you want communities, then the community and the museum have to play an active role in keeping each other alive and thriving.
Katherine?
Well, I think that one of the reasons that ICOM is struggling with the definition of a museum is that the traditional definition is really about the what, you know, what museums do, and it's very functional. It's a museum mandate. Whereas I'm more interested in the mission. I'm more interested in the why. And to me, mission and mandate are two very different statements. And the reason I didn't read the mandate statement is because it's so similar to the mandate of every other museum in the world. But the mission is what makes each museum unique. And you know, very early in my career, I was influenced by the Lower East Side Tenement Museum in New York, and their mission was, at that time it's changed, unfortunately, but at that time the mission was to improve tolerance and understanding among the immigrant communities of the Lower East Side of New York, something to that effect. So the mission wasn't to preserve and protect, the mission was to improve tolerance and understanding. And so, you know, for me, with the center that I'm working on, you know, the mission is about reconciliation. It's about continuity of Indigenous culture. All of the rest of that stuff about preserving collections and all of those things, yes, that's there, and that's absolutely critical and essential to who we are. But of course, that's what museums do. That is what museums do. But why are we doing it? That's the important part.
I think that's such a great way of challenging us, you know, as we think about both why we're doing sustainability. You know, I mean, there's an imperative that, you know, in some ways we should be going, of course not. And this kind of goes back to Anais's question about the, you know, the awareness of the issue versus the willingness to say something. But I really think it's it all comes together in a really interesting way. I guess there's a couple of questions, I guess, coming into the chat that we might have a quick moment for, and then I certainly want to see if you, panelists have any questions for each other before we wrap things up. Radwan wants to know about the role of museums, for the role of education in museums. And Anaïs, maybe you could talk specifically as sort of a, like how your climate museum specifically sees education, because I feel like you guys have a very clear perspective on the mission of that education.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial. It's a huge, you know, we prioritize action, but in order to get to action, you have to have education. You have to have these conversations. You have to have that back and forth of understanding each other and understanding what's at stake, understanding what the context of the situation is, understanding how everything is connected, like we've talked about. And, you know, the way that people understand climate change impacts how they act on it. And like for one specific example of this is this idea between like individual action of like not eating meat or, you know, riding a bike to work, and what we focus on is civic action, like collective action, structural change. And this idea of certain actions can be more like addition and other actions can be more like multiplication. And so the way that people see talking to 3 people about climate change and that expanding the conversation versus riding a bike to work every day, and sure, that'll start conversations also. And being, you know, there's a whole conversation about like how that setting an example versus like calling a representative has like these different impacts. But a lot of people come to us with just, I'm afraid of climate change. What do I do? And it's always, what do I do? And you don't need to understand the climate science. Like, it's obvious that people care. It's obvious that people are being impacted. It's obvious that there's a role for them, and basically kind of shifting the perspective of like, I'm stuck. I don't know what climate change is. I don't know what to do about it, to like, there are so many options wherever you are, wherever you're coming from. There is a way to engage, and kind of building those connections, and like through the education, physical and mental connections, to create that change.
Daniel asks about the role of digital media on achieving sustainability. Does anybody have, some experience or a specific answer to that we can help him with?
Well, I've been a bit very concerned with the last movements within the digital world, with the launching of NFTs, and the burning of works of art and the destruction of works of art, and this idea that launching NFTs as something that has disappeared. So within the digital world, it may be used for some purpose, but when I think how it's being disseminated, the information towards the general public, I think it's causing lots of confusion, and we may be facing big destructions in the near future. But that's a guess, I haven't yet consolidated this thinking, but it concerns me.
Yeah, I think digital can have those impacts that are both pro-sustainability and anti-sustainability, or debilitating to that, and we cannot necessarily fully rely on those. Just quickly, do any of you wonderful panelists have a question that you were just dying to ask somebody else on the panel?
I'll just say that I really enjoyed hearing Katherine's this idea of the what versus the why of what defines museum, what creates it, and I will definitely be thinking about that from now on.
It actually came about because I was at the time working in a museum as a curator, where we had a very strong divide between the natural history curators and the human history curators. And the natural history curators were really deeply focused on very esoteric little points. So I was speaking to the curator of ornithology who studied the wingspans of birds. And I was the curator of history. And I said, well, I'm just not interested in studying the hind legs of chairs. That's irrelevant, And I think that we need to think about larger pictures. And so that's always been my practice, is thinking about what's the point? And action. I mean, that's what I'm interested in with what you're doing at your museum, is taking people from the point of awareness to the point of change.
Well, what's the point gets right at that also, A lot of the times when we're imagining how will a visitor engage with this, we ask ourselves, like, what if they ask, what's the point? What's our answer to that? And it's a helpful little examination.
Yeah.
Well, I fear that our time is just about up. But I think all of your words and experiences that you guys have shared with us over today, I think, have been just mind expanding in a way of taking this idea of knowledge and what can we do with that knowledge and how we can translate it into action. I like to believe, and I'm sure most folks on this program agree, that museums are a fantastic place to translate that knowledge into action, and I hope we will continue to find ways to do that. I want to thank Alessandro Gavano and Yelena Savic for working on the planning and behind the scenes today to keep things running smoothly, and Maureen Reese, the chair of WGS, who was also essential to planning and guidance. A couple of quick things, I guess, to wrap up. The WGS, as Luis says, is looking for ICOM members eager to get involved. And I think there's information about the committee on the ICOM website if you Google the WGS. Our committee, our International City Museum Committee of CAMOC is also welcoming interest and members, and there's a call for presentations currently open on the committee's annual conference focusing on connecting cities, connecting citizens toward a shared sustainability, tremendously relevant to everything we've talked about today. That call is open through the week. The conference takes place in Barcelona, but will be hybrid, so people can connect with it no matter which way you are or where you can be. Site to reach that is camoc.mini.icom.museum. There's social media you can follow for registration information and updates. Again, let me thank our wonderful panelists, Luis, Andrea, Katherine, and Ais. So much to all of y'all for spending some time with us, being part of this conversation. It's been great getting to know you guys just a little bit, and I look forward to more. And to all of our attendants here at the program, it's been wonderful, and let's all work toward these critical goals together. All right.